We just purchased this 20-foot shipping container at an auction locally. This thing is a Chinese unit. It's a pop-up unit. This did not ship on the boat over. So in this video, we are going to show you how to fix this thing up to make it withstand the Canadian climate. Stay tuned, hope you learned something. So one thing that's really cool about this unit is that it isn't shipped in a normal vessel slot, and therefore they can go wider with it. So this here is actually, it's 9 foot 10 inches wide on the outside, which is I think 3,000 millimeters. They're using millimeters in all of this. It's built in China. That allows us to have probably 9 foot 2 inches interior width. That is way wider than a normal container office. We're left with 7.2, so we get an extra 2 feet inside of here. So there's lots of extra room, and that's great. So if we're gonna fix this thing up, we might as well add the insulation to the outside and retain that interior width. Plus, the inside of this thing actually isn't so bad. It looks kind of nice. You know, definitely satisfied the look and feel of a person that wants to utilize this as an office in an industrial or commercial work setting. So let's show you why this thing is no good for our climate. Inside of here, the foam, we've actually ripped the door and the 2 windows out of this thing because they were junk, they were paper thin. But this is just packing foam. This is not a vapor barrier. This is hardly R value. So we don't want to utilize this type of foam as insulation. If anything, it might work okay for some sound value because it's open cell foam. It's not closed cell. So there's little tiny air pockets inside of there, and that works well for a batten style insulation to absorb sound, and potentially it works well here. But what we want to do is actually steel stud the outside of this. The header and the footer and the sides of this thing were actually protruding 2 inches outwards beyond the outside surface of this wall panel here, and that allows us room to use 1 5/8 steel studs, and that will give us now an area, a pocket there where we can fill that full of 2-pound closed cell spray foam. So that's going to give us our vapor barrier, and that there is going to give us some R value to keep the warmth inside of here. And then we can finish this with our 3/8 PVC wall panel on the exterior. There are a few things in here that they can do well in China, and it's these pre-manufactured panels that are basically steel on the outside, steel on the inside, but the interior, it's nice and white in here, and it's all protected as well with the film. It's a clean surface. I think the floor in here is a fiberglass floor. We looked underneath, and it looks to be similar material, a composite resin, but there's absolutely zero insulation under here. That definitely needs some spray foam underneath there. It looks like some square tubing that's running across, but there's room for us to foam right underneath all of the square tubes, and that there will give us a nice vapor barrier and insulation. And then the roof has a corrugated panel. I imagine they added those corrugations because that's literally part of their structure to span this distance across. And then on the roof, we can maybe jump up there later because we do have to fix it. This whole thing, it's got a concave roof, so it slopes to both sides. And then the structural header that goes all around this thing actually acts as a big eaves trough. And then that sheds all the water down the corner post out and through this. So it's an interesting design, it's an intuitive design. It's just not well insulated, and it just won't work in North America. I think we're fortunate enough, we only had to pay like $3,000 Canadian for this thing, so it's a pretty low cost experiment. This is just a flat end wall, no windows, no doors, and we actually mimicked this design with our perfect GLO concept. So it's really nice to have a wall where you can install desks, or you could have shelving, or you could do whatever inside of there, but you're not restricted by windows. Sometimes are not a good thing. So it's nice to have that one wall where there's nothing on it. Another thing, this is also a spot now with our new solar panel mounting kits where we could strut line vertically after we have spray foamed and finished, and give ourselves a bit of solar option here. We could potentially even run something off the roof there. The roof, we're still trying to figure out exactly how we're going to get that all fixed up, but we do know we need foam underneath on all the sides and up on the roof to get this thing a better R value to withstand this Canadian climate. We have a lot of Americans that say they can't get 1 5/8 steel studs, so we came to a big box store to see what they're seeing even here in Canada, and I thought there was, or at least you look on the website and you see 1 5/8, but it looks like we really have the 3 5/8 or the 2.5 inch steel studs. So this here, there are tracks and then there's studs, and you've got to make sure that the tracks are for the bottom and the top, and then the steel studs are your actual stud. And you'll see on the studs here, that there are all the slots in the studs. And so the circular slot we're really going to start trying to use for putting EMT pipe in there. So we'll use that as our bracing, but we'll also be able to run the conduit through there, which will be running our electrical. And then this little groove here is where you snap in your stiffener bar. So if you buy those stiffener bars, that really keeps all the studs nice and straight and in alignment. Normally before we did anything on a container mod, we would draw everything up in 3D, but because this is such a one-of job, there's no sense in wasting all that time and effort in the engineering department. So we're just gonna figure this out as we go and try to come up with the best solution, and if we end up having to do it twice, so be it. Speaking of doing it twice, I'm pretty sure this part is still laying around the shop. Here's where we figure out that the roof actually has a curve to it and it's not going to work, so we head back to the drawing board. We ended up installing a track on the inside in the open area of this roof, and we were able to build off of that structure with our single slope trusses. This works out pretty good because it transfers all the weight to the sides of this container. We don't want anything just touching the middle because we see how paper thin this whole container is, and this will at least get it to the outside headers and then hopefully transfer that weight down the corner posts. On the two end walls, we were able to place a regular steel stud track, and then inside of there, we were able to set the monopitch trusses right inside. You'll notice on the trusses that there's little angle brackets, and that's what's going to allow us to run the roof purlins. We're not going to use regular roof purlins, we'll just use steel stud again. Now when we tin roof this, we'll have something to fasten our tin sheeting to every 24 inches. So here we're placing these steel studs on the trusses, and we're paying close attention to making sure that everything's nice and straight as we go across so that it's not all wavy after we lock this in with spray foam. This angle iron here is return flashing. That's going to allow us to install our soffits, and we'll need a little bit of a fascia board above the header on the high portion of the single slope roof, and then we'll also need our regular fascia. So this thing's framed up quite well. The boys did a great job getting this all MacGyvered and ready for foam. It was difficult trying to work off of something. It's different than what we normally do when we have the corrugated containers and we know what we're doing, but we feel like it's getting close now, and just need to get the windows and doors installed and then book spray foam. Here we are at a local lumber shop, and they got a pretty cool selection of in-stock windows. These aren't necessarily the best triple pane windows, but they have selection. A lot of times when you need a window fast, this is where we go. They'll stock horizontal sliders, vertical sliders, and picture windows in here. They're very competitive priced, and this is probably something that a lot of people can find locally, and so there should be a lumber yard similar to this. This is a locally owned operation that stocks these things, and they honestly, they have better stock here than they do the big box stores. A lot of times there, you're waiting 6-7 weeks when you want a custom sized window. The old windows were 120 millimeters, which is right close to 48 inches. So we're going to be looking for some 4-foot by 4-foot windows here in this selection. So knowing that we need the 48 by 48 size, I do see one of them tucked in behind here, and they tell me there's more in the back. And so this is compared at $710, and if you look right here, you can see 489 bucks. So we're gonna have about $1,000 Canadian into these windows here, and that's gonna upgrade them significantly from the aluminum Chinese pieces of junk that are in this container. So here we are, we're ready to throw the windows inside of this rough opening here. We've purchased the right size, or a size that fits, a North American size. But first, Emil here, he filled the cavity full of spray foam, and we've cut all of that so that we have as good of insulation on this interior portion. And then you'll see as we get to it how we plan on insulating up to this window. But can we just drag this over here? One thing we did to this window ahead of time is we actually want to install the window to the steel plane right here. So this is actually back from the outside sheeting that you'd normally call a traditional structure. So if you were to add 2 inches of insulation to the outside of your home, you'd actually have to take window jamb extensions, and here we use Paylite, right? And so we have the vinyl jamb extensions, and then just made a little extra jog out. And then what we're gonna do there is that's gonna be our trim around the window, and we'll be able to run our J channel of our reline right up to that. We'll just apply a layer of sealant all around here, make sure that this vinyl nailing fin is sealed right up there just to stop any cold air drafts. So now that we have the sealant applied to the flange that we're going to be mounting this to, we got one clean shot at this and then she's a dirty one, so let's get her right here. So here he's actually going to jump inside and we're going to shim up this window. One thing that's really important when you're working on shipping containers, we have floor drains in our shop. So this container may not be sitting level. We don't like using levels when we install windows or doors.
58 and 1/8.
We like to actually measure off a reference point on a shipping container. And then once you do level the container, you don't notice that your window's tweaked one way or the other. Let us know in the comments below. When I install windows, they give me all those holes in the nailing fin. I use absolutely every single one of them when I do my home. Some of the old timers say, oh, that's not needed, but I do notice when the sun hits this vinyl, it can droop and sag and get uneven. So I really like to both use a sealant or an adhesive to hold that nail fin, plus use absolutely every screw hole that's available to me. Let me know in the comment, am I right or am I wasting my time? Here I can see one thing we covered, the drain holes with this jam extension, but this is what this looks like. So here is that pay-light, that's interior trim, and then right here we actually have the jam extension. The vinyl extension right here, we're just gonna drill a couple holes where those drain holes are, and then that is gonna allow the water, even if it's behind the reline wall covering, at least it's gonna get down, follow that spray foam. Get it framed up, we're gonna do that next here. And then we'll show you how we plan on insulating up to this window, and that's actually gonna be what holds this thing in place. So here, this is the J channel of our PVC wall covering, and because we know what we're gonna be using on the outside of this thing, we can plan our framing around it. So if we want to actually be able to go through the nail fin portion of this J, we can align our exterior studs up nicely to that. And then now when our wall panels come across here, the wall panel will fasten right into the stud and hold the J nice and straight. That's going to allow us now this gap here. So we got over 1 inch of room there where we can tape off the window, tape off the stud, and fill that with 2-pound closed cell insulation. Here, we'll put the other stud in on the other side, and what we might be able to do is just slot in a track across. Given it was just packing foam inside the walls, we had to use regular window and door spray foam and fill that cavity. Because everything's getting spray foamed in, we don't frame headers traditionally that you would in a normal structure where the framing is the structure. We placed shims under the door to make sure that we could get a really good layer of sealant between there so that no ants or rodents had a path to get into our office or just a cold breeze throughout the winter. Another thing that's kind of nice, these things are just, you know, packing foam and tin, so they're not very heavy to handle, and so they got the smaller fork pockets here. So that's nice. I'm curious how much weight we're gonna add to this and whether we can still lift these things with a smaller unit. So let's look at these two and just see how structural they actually are. Ooh, that's kind of Mickey Mouse here. So that's our structural fitting, but it looks like it's only 1/8 of an inch or so. I'm sure that's a millimeter again. A couple mil thick corner casting. So it's not a casted product. This is definitely something that is just laser cut, and they folded it here. I can see their bend reliefs, and then they've just punched inwards, I think probably just to give it that look to fool people that it's actually lifting point or something. Bending this inwards will gusset it a little bit so that when you do hook a chain on here, maybe it doesn't unbend. But if you were to pull on this thing too hard, I imagine it wouldn't take much and you could just rip this corner post right out of here. Just for yourself, if you did end up buying one of these, just be careful how much you're tugging and torquing on it. Try to get it in its final location before you do all this work. So we ended up damaging the container floor, trying to move it out of our shop, which made us put this thing on a skid. Because it's wider than 8 feet, we actually had to modify an old oil field rig mat with some additional outside beams. It was a ton of work, but now this thing is solid and we can drag it anywhere around our shop. Originally, with the design of this shipping container, the water would actually flow up inside the header. It's like a flat roof building, and then it would run along to the corner post and then down, and that was like a built-in eavesdrop style system. But now that we've spray foamed everything here, it is sealed up, and so we're gonna have to get at pin sheeting this, or whether we zip sheet it or something, but we gotta get it covered because even though we got a cool container structure above us right now, water still can leak through here and get in here. So here it is, spray foamed on the underside, right adhered to that 1/2 inch fiberglass flooring that came with this shipping container. And looking at this now, I can tell our feet are gonna be nice and warm during these cold Canadian winters. So we're doing actually a great job making a silk purse out of a sow's ear here. We've got the reline that we typically run, our PVC white wall panels. We're running these vertically on the exterior of a building. There's a local car wash that's done this, and it's been done for about 5 years, and it still looks great. So I'm actually very impressed with the UV resistance of this stuff. There's a lot of white plastics that you purchase that just turn yellow immediately. These things, whatever chemical formula they have to resist the sun from fading it, seems to work. We're confident that we can utilize this on the exterior wall, but it was a lot of work. To put that into perspective, we did this one wall, 8 by 20-ish, in one day. Then, to save money, save time, we switched to a tin wall. So we tinned the other 3 walls plus the roof of this thing in another day. This is probably 3 to 4 times faster than the reline, and obviously not as premium of a product. Still looks good, and I think the contrast of the black, the gray, and the white looks cool here, especially when we look at soffits and the fascia. We utilized a PVC fascia, so that is basically never going to rot and mold, and it'll be there for life. And so that's what's going to be fighting the elements. And then just on the low slope side of this roof, we are just extending the tin outward. We're not running troughs or anything on this thing. We could collect all the water and run it to one side down a downspout and away, but we're just going to let her fly off this thing. But it's funny because, yeah, it is an inferior product to modifying a shipping container, but the added width of it is huge, and it's huge for people's comfort and their satisfaction at work. Like getting that 10-foot wide versus an 8-foot wide, that is a huge downfall to shipping containers. That's why everyone wants to go double wide, triple wide, but then once you do that, now it's 3-4 times more expensive than just a single shipping container. There's merit to modifying just one container. There's huge merit on cost basis to modifying ex-refrigerated containers that are already insulated, they're already lined on the interior. All you really have to do is pound in a bunch of windows and doors, pipe in your electrical, and you're rolling. It really depends on your budget, what you're trying to do with your specific project, but here is an instance that we can take a Chinese container that is not good for the Canadian environment, and probably not good for the lower United States hot environment, and pay a low amount of money for a base structure and then make it North American. And so one thing that China did well here is they didn't try to do too much. They didn't put in non-CSA approved wiring. They allowed us to do what we needed to do once it got here, but we got that envelope started. It's a huge advantage to shipping containers, in my opinion. We're not having to do a footing and then a basement, and then by the time traditional contractors are just ready for the framers to show up, we're done these things.